Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Be all welcome to this joint public hearing on whether it is time to revisit summertime. This is a joint hearing of the Committee on Legal Affairs, Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, and the Committee on Transport and Tourism. Unfortunately, because of illness and other commitments in the two chairs of the committees are unable to attend this meeting. But I would like to welcome heartily here our distinguished speakers for the hearing. At the same time, I would like to welcome a member of Czech Senate, Mr. Petr Šilar, who is a great warrior for abolition of time changes. His document called "For Only One Time" has been distributed to you. So please be welcome, all of you. Before giving the floor to our distinguished speakers, may I invite you to take 1 minute of silence for the victims of the tragedy of the Germanwings airplane in French Alps. Please stand up. Thank you very much. The first part of this meeting will deal with questions in competence of the Committee on Transport and Tourism. And I would like to give firstly the floor to Victoria Gil Casado, Head of Unit Planning, Communication and Interinstitutional Relations from DG MOVE of the European Commission. Madam, you would have 10 minutes to make your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, honourable members of this Parliament. The Commission thanks you for this opportunity you have given to us to participate to this certainly interesting debate that we have in front of us. Let me just frame this European piece of legislation, this directive adopted by the Commission already back in 2001. 2 times a year, the clock changed in the Member States, from summer to winter, from winter to summertime. But this practice was already introduced in the 60s and in the 70s in most of the European countries. The thing was that this change was not always done in the same times in the different member states. With the emerging of the internal market, it became clear that a harmonized approach of the different summer times arrangement in the European Union would be required. And this is the reason why the European directive exists. The legislation at EU level is to make sure that the internal market can function. Function how? Providing clear and long-term planning and fixed timing for the 2 biannual switch. The summertime was introduced at national level, but by member states. So the only decision that was taken at the beginning at the European level was to fix the dates and the precise timing when this has to happen. The directive that is in force today is a directive that dates, as I said before, from 2001. At those dates, there were 15 member states, and all of them requested the Commission to seek for harmonisation, because they were already observing that there were some difficulties in the common market because of the differences in the introduction from one member to another. For instance, in transport, that is the Director General to whom I work, we needed to find some coordination for the different timetables. In accordance with this directive, the Commission already presented a report of the impact of the current summertime regime back in 2007. This report was based on some information available to the Commission through different consultations, but as well on the basis of information provided by different member states on the effects of the current regime. Most member states, what they did was to consult different sectors, in particular agriculture, transport, tourism, health, etc. On the basis of those findings, for instance, in that report already, we could see that in energy, some savings were made, certainly, because of this change. However, they were not very big ones. On road safety, there were some countries, for instance, Estonia or Portugal, that did some investigations as well, and they came to the conclusion that no significant variations had come up because of this change of the summertime. In health, it has been observed, certainly, that there has been some impacts. Sleep, on biorhythms, in the 2, 3, 4 days around the changement of the time. However, could not be underlining as being very significant. Therefore, this report back in 2007 concluded that the practice of the summertime was good to encourage, for instance, all kind of leisure activities in the evenings when they were longer, that there were certainly some small but savings in energy, but in particular that there was little negative impact of summertime. And therefore, we concluded that it was better to maintain the current summertime arrangements. Last year, in 2014, we did another report. The Commission ordered a study to look closer at the potential effects for the internal market of not having a harmonised summertime in the EU. The study looked at different case studies, and conclusions were that certainly some, if we don't have this harmonisation, some extra cost, for instance, for the energy providers could come up, administrative and non-negotiations of the cost. But what it is important to point it out that this study did not include scenarios what could have happened if we abolish this summertime. So this was not part of the study. The study is available in the DG Move webpage for all of you. Therefore, on the basis of these two studies and how the directive has been implemented, we conclude that if we cancel this regime of summertime, this harmonisation, it would entail substantial inconvenience, not only for citizens, but as well for businesses. Therefore, I would like to end somehow with something that I said at the beginning. The directive is an essential instrument in guaranteeing harmonised timetables that ensure the proper functioning of the internal market. Until today, no member states have requested to abolish or to modify it. Therefore, we still believe that the directive of 2001 as it is continue to be appropriate. Let me finish this presentation as reminding you that this weekend on Sunday we will be changing our clocks, advancing on 1 hour. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam. I think that we will take another presentation and then we will have a block of questions for the two presentations altogether, if you would agree with that. Thereby, I would like to pass the floor to another distinguished guest, Brian Lawton, a transport safety consultant from Transport Research Laboratory from the United Kingdom. Sir, you have the floor. 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Oh, that's better. Excellent. So, yes, I'm Brian Lawson. I work for TRL. We're known as now the Transport Research Laboratory. We're a private company. We were privatised in 1996, but we don't distribute profits. Any profits we make, we reinvest into our own research. So we've maintained our independence through that structure. You may know us from, we're behind some of the car testing work, which you see in the image there. So let's start with the basics. Just on this map here, we've got the different time zones across Europe. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west, so the further east you are, the further ahead you are. The further west you are, the later you get up effectively. And as Victoria has explained already, of course, and you well know, in the spring we put the clocks forward, and in the autumn, or fall as it's known in America, the clocks go back. So the way I have to remember it is to go spring forward, fall back. That works. Just a few points of interest on the map there. Iceland does not change from GMT throughout the year. Iceland, I believe, stays on GMT throughout the year. Britain and Ireland and Portugal in the next area all jump by an hour and then go back again. There's a couple of African countries you can see at the bottom, Tunisia and Algeria, I think they are, that don't change. But most of Europe changes, certainly most of the mainland of Europe changes. And this is what's known often in many countries as daylight saving time, or DST, sometimes it gets shortened to. The reason we change the clocks, of course, is to make sure we're making more use of the long daylight hours in summer. We've got fewer daylight hours in winter, so there's less benefit to changing at that time of year. The title daylight saving time is potentially a little bit confusing because you can't save daylight, you can't bottle it in the summer and then unpack that bottle in the winter and make use of those hours there. But what we can do is make better use of the time we have. So, for example, today I actually left home when it had been light for several hours. But when I go home tonight, it will have been dark for several hours. If only my working pattern was earlier in the day, I might have been able to do my travel at both ends of the day in the daylight. From a road safety point of view, why does that matter? There's a lower crash risk when it's light. On our roads, particularly for pedal cyclists and pedestrians, people are less likely to get injured on the roads in daylight than at night, than in the dark. So although darker mornings are bad for road safety, lighter afternoons and evenings are good for road safety. So there's a benefit at one end and a disbenefit at the other. But there's actually more travel in the afternoon and evenings. There's more activity on the roads in the afternoon and evenings. And the net effect of those is that by changing the clocks, we have fewer collisions in the afternoons and evenings, more in the mornings, but not nearly enough to offset the benefit. So by changing to summertime, we actually get a reduction overall in the number of collisions. We get more in the morning, but far fewer in the afternoons. And just to bring that home, this is some old data from Great Britain. From 2009 as it happens, but I've not picked it out because it suits my pattern. It just happened to be one I had on my laptop. the other day when I was preparing the presentation that I pulled off easily. And you can see there's a peak. This is the number of casualties in each hour of the day, going from left to right. The farmost left, bottom left, is the number of casualties between midnight and 1 a.m. And then it goes through the day until 11 till 12 at the far right-hand end. And you can see that there's a peak at about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, but a bigger peak and a longer peak in the number of casualties at sort of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the evening. So the aim with daylight saving time is to reduce that peak at the right-hand side, and yes, it will have an increase in the peak in the left-hand side, but overall it will have a reduction. Now, there are a few points to make. The effect isn't uniform across the continent. In particular, the further north you go, there's less benefit to the change because in the summer you have very long daylight hours, and in the winter you have very few daylight hours, so you don't get a benefit in the same way. And at the far south, you don't necessarily get a benefit either because there's less variability in the number of daylight hours in the first place. So you might get, even in winter in Portugal, for example, you can get a good 10 hours of daylight. Also, within each time zone, the further east you are, the earlier it gets light. So there's more benefit if you're at the eastern end of your time zone than is the case at the western end of the time zone. I know more about Great Britain, I'm afraid, than anywhere else in Europe, so I'm going to talk a bit about Great Britain and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the wider European experiences. So in Great Britain, we said, actually, given it's light in the mornings, why don't we go a little bit further? Rather than just changing forward 1 hour in the summer, why not change 2 hours forward in the summer? Or why not stay on summertime all year round? So between 1968 and 1971, we stayed on GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, +1 all year round, effectively European winter time, continental winter time. And during the hours that were affected, the 7 till 10 in the morning and 4 till 7 or 1600 to 1900 in the evening, in those slots there was a 12% reduction in the number of people who were killed or seriously injured, specifically as a result of the change in the clocks. So by staying on summertime or standard time all year, we know that it saved many thousands of people being killed or seriously injured. But of course that's no consolation to those who sadly lost their lives in the darker mornings. And no one knows who it is who actually lived that wouldn't have lived had we not changed those clocks. You can't point to someone and say, well, you know, you were lucky because if it wasn't for the clocks changing, then you'd have died. We can't identify who they are. We can only identify who the people who've been killed are. And of course, since then, things have changed enormously. Most recently, in 2009, we had a look into this, and we looked specifically at what we call single-double summertime. So in our case, that would mean going to Greenwich Mean Time +1 in the winter, Greenwich Mean Time +2 in the summer. And we estimated that that could prevent each year 80 deaths and 212 serious injuries on the roads. But when you zone in on different geographies of Great Britain, the effect varies. So in Scotland, it's more debatable as to whether there's a benefit at all. And in the very far northwest of the British Isles, it may even result in more people being killed. Portugal went to Central European time for 6 years at the end of the 1960s and a further 4 years in the 1990s. But that, as I understand it, that wasn't to gain the road safety benefit because they have long daylight hours anyway. There's already light in the morning and evenings. So the reason for doing that change wasn't about road safety and doesn't prove anything either way. In Sweden, there was some suspicion that the number of crashes would rise or fall after the change in the time zone, after the clocks went forward or back. But actually, some studies there identified that there were no change in the number of crashes, but people were more likely to adapt their behaviour, and people were getting up earlier anyway with the daylight or either way. In Germany, on the other hand, when summertime was introduced, thinking that it would reduce the number of people that were killed, they were concerned that actually it increased the number of people killed because the extra daylight at a time when people could use it meant that people went out more, did more travel, and subsequently there were more collisions. I think Victoria has already referred to a more recent European Commission report than the one I've got on screen there. In essence, people don't seem to object to changing to summertime each year. And then the very last study I'm citing here, by the Agricultural Development Advisory Service, again from a good 20 years ago, indicated that there would be extra benefits, primarily for Britain, if Britain were to adopt single double summertime, i.e. if Britain went to the continental Europe mainland time, Central European time. They estimated that that would be the best option from a road safety perspective. So to sum up, we like lighter mornings. They're good for road safety, but we'd prefer lighter evenings. We want to reduce the amount of travel in the dark, but there's a concern that that might increase the amount of travel even in the daylight. And there may be a case for going further, at least in some countries. But there's a little bit of an unknown there, and there's a politically challenging environment. And that's me right on cue, the 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the presentation. That was very interesting. And now we have time for questions and eventually answers by the first two speakers. So I open the list, and the first one would be Mrs. Niebler.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Ein herzliches Dank.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you very much to the representatives of the Commission and our expert speakers. Well, allow me to start by making a comment. I come from a large member state, and twice a year people get very irritated about the change of time. They find it irritating and unpleasant. And I keep hearing requests for us to take an initiative to try and get rid of the time changes each year. Well, Commission, you're absolutely right. This isn't just a European issue. I mean, it would be useful to have some kind of single market coordination, but it is an issue for the member states. Do they really need the time changes or not? But people get very irritated in our country and in others, I believe. So I would like to ask the Commission whether you could do something about it. And what would be the consequences if you could get rid of summer time? I think that it would be interesting to assess the consequences of that. I also have a comment for the second speaker on transport. Well, you gave us quite a comprehensive overview of the situation as you see it, with empirical experiences on road safety, and I've understood that changes to the timetables of trains cost a lot of money. Of course, it's complicated for a start, but it also costs lots of money. Twice a year, you have to completely update your timetables. Have you got any reliable figures on that? How much it actually costs to do that? I've also got further questions for the next panel about the influence of time changes on biorhythms. So there are impacts on animals and human beings. If you go to all sorts of health specialists, there's a lot of irritation out there.
Thank you. We will have the possibility to discuss biorhythms afterwards. The next is Herr Reul.
Bedanke mich.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I'm actually very happy that we've finally been able to hold a hearing on this subject. It's the first time the European Parliament has dealt with this subject at all. The first time I brought up the issue, I was wondering whether the ideas in the directive were actually implemented. Well, the Commission representative did talk about this. I would recommend everyone here in the room to read the report about the situation in the different member states. It's like a cabaret. It's ridiculous. It's quite humorous, in fact, but it's absolute rubbish. It's absurd. They say, people just say we don't want to deal with it. So we tried to talk to the member states, but they basically refused to respond. No one's been able to give us a proper answer. And now the Commission has carried out a new study. We can look at the study in detail, but I'm sure that it wouldn't stand up to scientific criteria. I think it's crazy that we're spending our money on such rubbish. So, when are we going to get proper data and facts? It's not a question of trust. It's not enough for people to say, oh, we want to change this. No, we need some facts. Okay, now we've learned something. Transport, if you might get more accidents, that's something that should give pause for thought. Well, the strongest argument we have is saying that we need to harmonise this for the single market. But I think the whole point is that we should do it across Europe. There's no point doing it for one country and not for another. Now, it seems that everyone's saying somebody else needs to kick the ball rolling. Europe says the member states have to do it, the member states say Europe has to act. So, who is responsible if we want to change all of this? Who can take a decision? Who can set the ball rolling? I would be very keen if we could get some precise information about that. Who is capable of setting the ball rolling, taking the initiative? Now, I'm not particularly surprised that no member state has raised the idea of getting rid of it, but because it's just an effort for them and they don't want to take it. Thank you.
Yes, I will take one more question, and then there will be the first block of answers, and then we proceed with other questions. So the next question by Mr. Zdechovský.
Vážené dámy, vážení pánové.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for opening up this debate in the European Parliament. There are people here, important people here, who are passionate about this issue. It is very important to discuss issues of interest to the citizens. I've been dealing with this issue for 6 years, and over these 6 years I have received hundreds of letters and read dozens of studies on the issue. I'm not going to criticize the European Commission's directive, nor am I going to criticize any research. I do want to mention, though, some research that hasn't been mentioned here. In 2008, a study was published according to which there was a 6 to 10% increase in heart attacks.
The questions of bioreturns afterwards.
I react. Další studie z roku.
Another study in Science Daily showed that people cannot react to time changes. Other studies show that switching from summer to winter time is damaging to people. And my question is, are we in the European Union going to react to these studies? 2008 research in Australia on biorhythms based on research in 1971 to 2001, shows that in the week following the switch from winter to summertime, there is an increase of suicides in the order of 5 to 7%. Another issue is the number of road accidents. And transport has already been mentioned. My question is, how are we going to respond to the research findings published in Sleep Medicine, whereby the number of accidents rises by 8% after a time change, or the Swedish research which shows an 11% increase in road accidents? It may be, as you said, that it's not possible to prove whether light or darkness had a role in a collision between cyclists. But for us, what's important is that there is a pattern, and year on year there is an increase, year after year there is an increase in people involved in traffic accidents. That means the numbers are there, the figures are there, so shouldn't we do something about it?
May I ask our two first distinguished speakers?
Gribēju aicināt divus godātos runātājus, varbūt sniegt atbildes atbilstoši savai kompetencei.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions. Certainly, as you have already mentioned, is a passionate issue. And this is true that whenever we talk about summertime, those complaints that you receive from citizens, we hear in our families around and the people around us. But from the point of view of the Commission as an institution, as the one that has to handle the harmonization of the possible concerns for the internal market, I'm afraid that what we can say at this stage is, first, we could question whether we abolish or not this directive. This is a possibility. We can come and abolish it. Once we abolish, the question is what we will do if one or another member state decide to maintain the change of summertime. Then we go back to the past. The third solution should be, on the basis of the internal market, still we could propose forbidding all member states to change from one winter time to summertime. But for this third solution, first, until now, at least the Commission has not received any request from member states, this I said before. The complaints that we receive, we do not receive hundreds and thousands, but only a few ones around the dates where the subject is changing. Most of them coming from some citizens, one or two associations in Europe. Businesses apparently are not very much disturbed with the issue. On the contrary, they want a long-term and clear planning of when things are changing, if they have to change. So once we would put maybe this third initiative on the table as Commission, we are unfortunately not sure of what is going to happen, whether there will be an agreement among member states or not, within the Parliament or not. So, as I said before, from the institutional point of view, we have little room for manoeuvre, because I have to say that the decision on the standard time, however, falls within the unique competence of each and one member state. Thank you very much.
So to answer the specific question about rail timetables, the cost of publishing rail timetables, I'm afraid I can't help with that. That's outside of my area. I think in terms of needing science, in terms of having a proper scientific understanding, absolutely back the comments that were made there. It's very easy to just have the numbers and think that shows something, and that kind of joins with the third question about the increase in accidents that we get in the autumn and the decrease in accidents we get in the summer. So some of that increase and some of that decrease in road accidents we would expect to happen anyway because of the fact that the number of daylight hours reduces. So some of it is possibly due to the clocks, but some of it is due to the natural seasonal variation anyway. And it's very easy for people to say, well, there's a difference. That's because of the daylight change. And it isn't. Not all of it is. Only some of it is. But I think that covers off everything I can answer in terms of what was said in that last round of questions.
Thank you. We will take other questions. Mr. Becker.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Herzlichen Dank allen.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, experts, and thank you to the Commission as well. We've had some very interesting information. Well, I think I need to clarify here. For me, the Commission is responsible for taking the initiative. How that should then proceed in legislative terms is then a second level, but it's the Commission that has that responsibility in the triangle of competences, so that's an important fact. Like my colleagues, I would state that there is no long-term scientifically based study on this issue. It does not exist to date. Okay, we can talk about the number of deaths and accidents on the road, but we do need something much more far-reaching. We know that school children and old people have been shown to experience serious problems. These studies were not included in the evaluation. And as for companies, if summertime was abolished, then I don't think that they would experience any costs. I think that they would adapt to that easily and without large extra costs. What we should be talking about here is not summertime in itself, but just the simple concept of changing times. Then maybe at a later point people could argue in favour of summertime. I don't really know how, but as far as I'm concerned, what we're doing is, what is the point of changing times at all if we don't save any energy costs, if we've got higher costs in lots of other areas, and on top of all of that, we don't have any gains in the transport sector either. We should deal with all these topics, and if there is no time for all of this, then we need to take an extra year to decide on the subject. We're talking about thousands of peoples and maybe billions of euros. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Liese.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Zunächst mal vielen Dank an die drei Ausschüsse, die...
Thanks, Chairman. And thanks to the three committees for organising this hearing. As EPP coordinator, I very much wanted the Employment and Public Health Committee to be involved, but my colleagues from the other political groups didn't support me on that, but I do think this is an important hearing. I want to support what the four colleagues have said and pick up where they left off. We've heard again that no member state has sought to abolish summer time. But that's irrelevant, because one member state acting alone wouldn't change anything. We need a European response. if Parliament were to draft an own initiative report and ask the Commission to make a proposal for abolition, would it do that? The Commission is sufficiently creative, and where it could find a legal basis to make a proposal, it has always done so in the past when it has wanted to. So it could do here. And I think we need an answer which takes into account the relationship between the Parliament and the Commission.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Hautala.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I would like to basically support almost everything that has been said by colleagues so far. And well, concerning what we have heard from the expert on traffic safety, let me just point out that what I think we have heard is that the impact of the daylight saving hours at best is very uneven in different parts of Europe. And coming from the north, we really suffer from those dark evenings in November, December. And you would as well if you would live there or if you would visit our cities, especially northern Finland in December. You wouldn't see any daylight anyway. So, and the second is that you actually explained to us quite well that sometimes the consequences contradict each other. Like, yes, light evenings are good for transport safety, but then in Germany people go out more in the light evenings and then they cause more accidents. So, I mean, what kind of result is this? And then what we have heard from the Commission, I think, is in dire contradiction with the philosophy of legislation of the Juncker Commission. What we hear from Mr. Timmermans every time, that show us that the directives have added value. So does this directive really have an added value? I doubt very seriously. So I think it would be perfectly in line with the Commission's legislative philosophy to repeal this directive as unnecessary, as an important example in the REFIT programme. And when I was asked last summer after the elections what would be my first candidate for the REFIT programme, I would say the summertime directive. And I got 1,000 likes in Facebook. So perhaps the Commission doesn't get 1,000 likes, but we as represented people, we do get 1,000 likes, as Mr. Niebler has said, Mrs. Niebler. So concerning what you have said that the companies want long-term planning. So does this mean that you wouldn't propose any changes in legislation at all? I wonder. And I also believe that the Commission has the right of initiative, but Mr. Liese has very well pointed out that the Parliament can help the Commission to come to sound conclusions, and we also have our informal right of initiative by the majority of is it component members? I don't know. But anyway, so there are means by which we, as representing people who seem to be disturbed, and I very much believe what Mr. Beckers has said is correct, that it's the actual changing of clocks. I mean, I don't change them anymore because in November I think, okay, March will come very soon. In March I think that November will come very soon. So why change clocks at all?
Okay, let's take this set of questions, and may I ask our two distinguished speakers whether they wish to react? Madam.
Forgive me if I did a wrong statement before, but I've never denied that the Commission has the right of initiative. But as you very clearly pointed out, the Parliament has as well a way to intervene, and this is very helpful. The INI reports are a very good way to help the Commission to proceed, because as I had told you before, as from the time being, we have not received any request from Member States. We can't propose a modification. The three different possibilities I talked to you before. But then we have to come, before presenting these proposals, we have to come with impact assessment. We have to come with figures, with good ones, not the ones that, as you suggested before, were not very prudent, good, complete enough provided by Member States. So in the framework of the better legislation, whatever we could do, either providing for a new proposal or repealing the existing one, and don't forget that if we repeal the existing one, we come back to the efforts that I mentioned before. If one member state or two or three out of the 28 still decide to go ahead with the changing of clocks, then I'm not very sure that business will not be concerned. Maybe business in that country or in the other country separately not. But the cross-border business could have been affected. So I'm not denying that we have the right of initiative, but the elements we have until now and the requests we have received until now don't point out to go in that direction. But I encourage the Parliament not only to go into the INI, but to encourage research that could help us in order to find the good way of proceeding, changing, not changing, when, for what sectors. I think that this could be a very good and relevant initiative for our citizens. So the Commission is not opposed to act in the next 100 years. The Commission needs to justify, on the basis of better legislation, every achievement we conclude. Thank you.
Yes, just to come back on primarily the last point. Yes, it is a very important point to note that it is an uneven effect across Europe, and the changes mean that some people benefit, some people disbenefit. Overall, across Europe, in road safety terms, we believe that there's a benefit in terms of a reduced number of casualties because of the change in the clocks. But that's some of that's sort of modelling, if you like, rather than necessarily a directly observed number. It's hard to tell, and there could be undesirable secondary effects, as you say. In terms of people going out more because they've got more daylight hours, one answer to that is, well, why don't we make sure that everyone's awake during night time to minimise travel? But presumably that would be an undesirable thing too. So it's a really difficult balance to find to make sure that we've got the best effect, purely in road safety terms, aside from anything else. And sort of really understand, I think it comes down to a political decision. Do we want everyone on the same time, in which case some people have got to sacrifice for the greater good, if you like? Or are you willing, as parliamentarians, to have differences in time? But that's clearly outside of my remit. But I think there is a sacrifice to be made by some, effectively, and that's an unpleasant decision to make.
Thank you. Last two questions to this first block. The first one by Mrs. Kaufmann.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Im Unterschied zu
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Well, unlike some of my previous speakers, I have some real questions. I'm not going to say whether I think that the changing time is good or bad, because of course this is a hearing and we want to hear from you. I'd like to talk to my colleague from Great Britain. I was impressed by the correlation between the number of road accidents and the changes in time. I was wondering if this is a scientifically solid connection. Accidents are caused by a number of different factors. Cars might be in bad technical condition. The driver might be driving under the influence of alcohol. Maybe the rules of the road are not being followed, etc., etc. If you look at the number of cars on the roads, has increased massively in recent years. So it's no surprise that in the kinds of times of day when you have rush hour, the number of accidents is quite high. That might not necessarily have anything to do with changes in time. It might be as a result of other factors. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about the influence of the other factors. Is there a direct link between the number of road traffic accidents or the deaths on the roads and the issue of changing the time?
Thank you. The last question by Mrs. Šojdrová.
So thank you, Mr. President. I will speak in Czech because we have here a lot of Czech guests. So, děkuji, pane předsedo.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. I'm rather inclined to join those behind the initiative addressed to the Commission, calling on it to commission a study producing findings on what the impact would be of a switch to single time. Senator Schiller had no idea how much support he would find here. I'm glad that there are colleagues across the political spectrum and from across the EU who support this idea. The idea is to simplify the situation, to stop unnecessary time changes. I think I see this as a technical question. We should seek an unemotional, technocratic approach to the issue and just find out what the impact of the abolition of the time change would be. Clearly, the member states would have to be won over. The Parliament would have to agree. I think the Commission has understood that the initiative is there. The ideas are being aired. I'm happy to draft a written question to the European Commission calling on it to publish an impact assessment and, if appropriate, an amendment to the directive. I think the European Parliament has a valuable role to play because we can hear what our constituents are saying. And I'd like to thank those who are behind this initiative, especially Senator Schiller from the Czech Republic.
May we have the reactions? Madam, you have the first floor.
So as for the request of making an impact assessment of the possibility of just cancelling, what could be the effects? Certainly the Commission could do this study, the Parliament as well. So like that maybe you could see that it's neutral, so this can be done by your newly created Impact Assessment and Studies Office. But there is still a question of budgetary means on the priorities of the Juncker Commission. And some time, for the time being, is not among those priorities, but under the request of one of our co-legislators and our budgetary authority, everything is possible.
So yes, in response to the first question, absolutely, all accidents, or almost all accidents, are the result of numerous factors all coming together at the same time, whether they're vehicle defects, whether they're daylight, whether they're the driver being tired or over the drink drive limit or whatever. There are a wide variety, and accidents happen normally when a number of them come together. So we can't say of any individual accident, this happened because of the darkness, or this wouldn't have happened if it had been light. We can't do that about any individual accident. But what we see is a jump in the number of accidents that happen effectively in the same hour when it's dark compared with the same hour when it's light. So we know that some of the difference, if not all of it, but some of the difference at the very least is because of that darkness. In any individual scenario, it may not have prevented the accident, but the total numbers suggest that there's a meaningful difference. And there are different scientific approaches to modelling for that. You talked about volume of traffic, for example. So we would always look in terms of the number of accidents per kilometre travelled to make sure we're comparing two things that are the same, rather than just the number of accidents, because that doesn't take account of increases in background traffic. But there are other ways of doing it in order to identify, just on the number of accidents alone, whether there are more accidents in the darkness than in the light, even without taking account of that, by comparing within-year numbers. So there are a variety of ways that suggest that it is almost certainly because of the change in the clocks that we get a reduction in the summer, in part, and we would get less of a reduction in the summer were we not to change the clocks. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Thereby we have finished the first block. I thank the two distinguished guests. by an optimistic message that we have strong allies even in the European Commission, namely Commissioner Bieńkowska, responsible for the internal market, told me that she, from the deep of her heart, is in favour of abolishing summertime. Thank you very much. And we move to the second part of our hearing, and the floor would go to Professor Marta Merov from Ludwig Maximilians Universität München, Institute of Medical Psychology. Madam, we are listening.
Mr. Svoboda, Mr. Buzek, sehr geehrter Herr Kramer, ladies and gentlemen of the European Parliament. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today, to be part of this important discussion on what to do about summertime. You've heard about traffic, tourism, you'll hear about tourism and economy, and in the coming 10 minutes I'll try to tell you how scientists view daylight saving time. As you've heard, my name is Martha Merrow. I'm a professor in the Department of Medical Psychology at the Ludwig Maximilians University in Munich. My research concerns the daily or circadian clock, and I'm here not representing my work so much as that of my field, chronobiology. That said, much of the impetus for our scientific discussions on this topic comes from the work of my colleague, Till Ronneberg, who is also from Medical Psychology Department in Munich. To get you into this material quickly, I'm going to ask you to stop and reflect for a moment. Sounds like medical psychology already, right? Stop and reflect for a moment on those with whom you live, specifically when they sleep in relation to when you sleep. Most of you will recognize that the others in your household are sleeping either earlier or later than you are. The teenagers in your house are much later, the younger children much earlier. Importantly, even amongst adults, everyone has a unique preference for a certain time window in which to sleep. And I guess that when you think about it, you would concede that this preference is not a preference in the traditional definition of the word. You don't choose your sleep timing or your chronotype because it's controlled by your biological clock, and your biological clock is programmed in your genes. This is point number one. Point number two is that the timing of sleep is just the tip of the iceberg. Biological clocks control our life at many levels, ranging from gene activation and hormonal regulation to behavior, cognition, and performance. Their task is to optimize metabolism, cardiovascular, immune function, other systems, by making sure that they occur or function best at certain times of day. A third concept is that the circadian clock is actively taking signals from the environment in the form of light and darkness. Both the timing and the amount of light combine to adjust the timing of our biological clock. The impact of light on your biological clock is so strong that if you live in the eastern part of a time zone, you'll wake up earlier relative to local time because the sun time is earlier. The impact of light on your biological clock is so strong that less light during the day and more light during the night makes most of you a later chronotype. The impact of light on your biological clock is so strong that if you expose yourself to more light in the evening than in the morning, most of you will become later chronotypes. If your chronotype, your light-dark environment, and the clock that controls your social schedule were perfectly suited to one another, then you obviously would need no alarm clock. Unfortunately, the Munich Chronotype Questionnaire database that Professor Ronneberg has built indicates that 80% of the population uses an alarm clock on work days. This number is probably so high due to a combination of social schedules. Work and school times require that we get up early. A trend towards low light makes most people's biological clocks move later in the day. and daylight saving time, which pushes the social clock another hour earlier. What happens when we use an alarm clock on workdays? The most common pattern shows that we fall asleep only slightly earlier than on free days, but we're woken up substantially earlier, long before the sleep time specified by our biological clock is over. Thus, sleep is both shortened and it's suboptimally timed. We're awake and active when our clock says to sleep. With a reference to the jet lag that you experience when you travel, this condition of earlier and shorter sleep is called social jet lag because it's induced by the social clock, by the need to get to work or to school. If travel jet lag is kept to an occasional occurrence, there seems to be no serious consequence. But social jet lag is a persistent condition, week in and week out, usually persisting for years or for entire careers. And there are consequences to this chronic behavior. Some of these are thought to relate to the shortening of sleep. Sleep deprivation leads to poor performance, bad judgment, and possibly personality changes such as decreased empathy and decreased social competence. Other consequences of social jet lag likely relate more directly to disruption of the biological clock due to sleeping or waking and being active at the wrong time. Social jet lag correlates with nicotine addiction and alcohol and caffeine consumption. Social jet lag is also associated with overweight, metabolic disease, and depression, all major health problems of the 21st century. When we indicate correlations and associations, this means that there is a statistically significant increase in the indicated behavior or pathology that is predicted by the amount of social jet lag. More social jet lag, more overweight. This is the background information necessary to understand how daylight saving time impacts health. The DST transition in spring effectively advances the social clock by an hour. In the fall, we get that hour back as we push back to normal time. Meanwhile, the impact of light on your biological clock is so strong that it is set by the actual light and dark environment, not by the social clock. So with DST, we just have to go to work an hour earlier according to our biological clock, and we accumulate more social jet lag. We note two classes of effects that are associated with DST. The first are acute effects in the form of increased heart attacks, as you've heard about, and accident rates in the first days after the time change. The second are chronic effects deduced and predicted from correlations. The transition to summertime means an extra hour of social jet lag, and more social jet lag means more cigarettes, more alcohol, more overweight, more type 2 diabetes, more depression. These are some of the modern epidemics and thus contribute substantially to healthcare costs and losses in productivity. At 1% of the GNP, the gross national product, in which case it would cost the European Union 131 billion euros a year. Moving away from DST and decreasing social jet lag would obviously decrease this figure. This figure may sound inflated to you, but I actually think it's a gross underestimate based on the experience of those most impacted by social jet lag, namely teenagers who experience the latest chronotypes due to normal developmental changes. Europe is proud of its academic tradition and recognizes the key role that education plays in her future. We recently published a study showing that high school students with later chronotypes and with higher social jet lag perform worse on exams given early in the day to when they are examined later. We thus are selecting our workforce, particularly those that go to university, those that get directed to skilled labor, partially based on chronotype. We know that DST increases social jet lag and that chronic social jet lag leads to performance and health deficits. From the scientist's viewpoint, we suggest that you target solutions to this problem, including increasing the daylight in our environment, controlling both the timing and amount of light, pushing back work and school times, and abolishing daylight saving time. All of these actions would decrease social jet lag in the European population. Thank you again.
Thank you, Madam. We will now take the second contribution to this block, and the floor will go to Dr. Werner van den Bruane, research fellow, Research Group Government and Law from the University of Antwerp. Sir, you have your 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear members of the European Parliament, thanks for this invitation. From the perspective of better regulation, I wish to highlight 4 points concerning the Summertime Directive. I will start with a brief reiteration of the legal importance of the Better Regulation Programme and the instrument of impact assessment, and then continue to scrutinise the directive. First, the legal basis and the justification offered in the explanatory memorandum in 2000. The second and third points concern the compliance with the principles of proportionality and subsidiarity respectively. And fourth, I will address briefly the ex post evaluation of 2007. By means of an introduction, what is the legal importance of evidence-based lawmaking? As a key component of the Smart Regulation Programme, the Commission's impact assessment procedure is aimed at securing, and I quote, a balance between political discretion and enhancing objectivity in lawmaking. Impact assessment reports contain the kind of information that is needed for a more rational consideration of the opportunity of EU action, and this consideration may include a review by the Court of Justice. Through the impact assessment, the Court can review the assessment by the legislator of complex, as in this case, very complex underlying socio-economic indicators, even though the Court still grants the EU legislator a large margin of discretion. Impact assessments are the main instrument through which the EU legislator can demonstrate compliance with the requirements of proportionality and subsidiarity too. In this particular case of the Summertime Directive, predates the Commission's Better Regulation Programme, of which the impact assessment is a crucial element. However, the explanatory memorandum served the same function, i.e. to ground EU action in facts and to justify the choice of legal basis and compliance with subsidiarity and proportionality as laid down in the treaty. I will treat these points in that order. First, legal basis. The legal basis for the Directive 2000/84 is the functionally driven and general harmonization clause, Article 1114 TFEU, formerly Article 95. It allows the EU to adopt measures, preferably directives, aimed at unifying or harmonizing national measures in order to improve the functioning of the internal market as set out in Article 26. The Court can find the applicability of this competence of approximation of laws by imposing 3 restrictions. First, that no specific clause in the treaty covers the proposed measure, priority of the lex specialis. Second, that the measure must in fact improve the functioning of the internal market, whereas mere discrepancies between, and this is rather important for our debate, mere discrepancies between national provisions do not suffice. Third, this improvement must be stated in terms of the elimination of an appreciable distortion of competition or the prevention of the emergence of future obstacles. The Court has summarized this in the 2009 case Vodafone, where it, and I quote again, the object of measures adopted on the basis of Article 95 must genuinely be to improve the conditions for the establishment and functioning of the internal market. While a mere finding of disparities between national rules and the abstract risk of infringements of fundamental freedoms or distortion of competition is not sufficient to justify the choice of Article 95 as a legal basis, the community legislature may have recourse to it, in particular where there are differences between national rules which are such as to obstruct the fundamental freedoms and thus have a direct effect on the functioning of the internal market or to cause significant distortions of competition. Though attractive, the qualifiers imposed by the Court, direct effect for internal market or appreciable distortion, are not easily interpreted. An analogy can be drawn to the judicial control of the concurrent competences in the German federal system, where similar qualifiers were added to establish the constitutionally required necessity for a federal measure in the realm of concurrent competences. In order to construe the appreciable effect required, the Bundesverfassungsgericht expects a federal legislator to demonstrate the actual effects or potential negative consequences. The legislator has to meet his burden of evidence, and this evidence has to meet, according to the German courts, standards of clarity, inclusion of all relevant options and elements, exclusion of irrelevant elements, and methodological consistency. The crucial matter if we draw the analogy, is thus the evidence put forward by the impact assessment and the explanatory memorandum. In the present case of the summertime directive, the memorandum seems to rely heavily on the results of the consultation, where economic operators generally argued in favor of the harmonization of the summertime. Relying on the outcome of the consultation process has indeed sufficed in the past to convince the Court of disruptive legislative diversity in the sense of Article 114. Nevertheless, the explanatory memorandum of 2000, and specifically the issue of the improvement to the internal market, does not seem appreciable to the extent that EU action seems necessary. Let me now turn to proportionality and subsidiarity. The duty to comply with the principle of proportionality consists of 3 points: the scope of the measure, the nature of the measure, and the weighing of costs and benefits, in particular referring to the financial and administrative burdens for states, enterprises and individuals. The form of the measure, in this case a regulation harmonizing, a directive, harmonizing national law, is clearly the least intrusive means of approximation, as I said before. Proportionality also serves as a catalyst for evidence-based lawmaking. However, the relative balancing of the costs and benefits of the directive as it is presented in the memorandum is not entirely convincing. The Commission based its assessments on an independent consultancy report that drew on various existing studies and materials. The conclusions of this consultancy report are neither paramount nor decisive, as the Commission admitted in the memorandum on various occasions. For instance, with respect to agriculture, the memorandum noted that no clear conclusions could be drawn, or for the environment, that at the present state of the art and know-how, it seems difficult, if not impossible, to draw valid universal conclusions. The impact of the Summertime Directive on health, energy and road safety were difficult to assess, and we're doing this here again 16 years later. It appears that leisure and tourism and transportation were the main drivers for the harmonization of the arrangements. However, with regards to transportation, a detailed assessment was merely based on one hypothetical report in France in 1996. As the ECJ requires individual appellants to provide qualitative and profound data when challenging an EU measure for a breach of proportionality, the same duty at least applies conversely to the EU legislator. The Court can only verify proportionality if the legislator offers substantive and sufficient data. It must be noted at this point that although the evidence seems unconvincing, in order for the Court to actively take issue with the legislator assessment, the Court requires a manifest error standard, and at the very least, the preparatory work in this case does not convince to justify a large margin of appreciation for the legislator. The justification in terms of EU subsidiarity as laid down in Article 5.3 TEU, requiring the added value of EU action and the inability of member state action, is offered in the explanatory memorandum accompanying the proposal for the directive. I will not repeat what the memorandum stated in paragraph 4.1, but it is exemplary of the unconvincing and circular reasoning that dominated subsidiarity justifications in the past. While the ECJ has been more permissive in its early interpretation of subsidiarity, such permissiveness fortunately has been abandoned. And, as the opinion of the Advocate General in Vodafone suggests, the impact assessment may prove crucial to this point. If I derive I have more on Vodafone in my written summary that I will provide. On the Summertime Directive, none of these elements in its subsidiarity justification delivers an answer to the 5 questions, as for instance set out in the impact assessment guidelines. These questions, in a nutshell, inquire into the transnational aspects of the problem at hand and the possible actions taken by the Member States and the clear benefits produced by action at EU level. Nowhere in the memorandum is shown exactly to what extent and between which Member States summertime is applied in a diverging manner even before the first directive. Furthermore, it is not clear why the Member States cannot coordinate this issue by themselves, although the memorandum mentions the opposition of one Member State. The added value, in this case, the added value of the EU consists of the simple act of harmonization, and the inability of the Member States is not even investigated, let alone justified. Both the impact assessment guidelines and the more recent judgments of the Court would require a better justification. I will come to my conclusion. The Summertime Directive predates the Commission Better, Now Smarter regulation program. It offers an example of the impetus for this very program. The justification in terms of choice of legal basis, proportionality and subsidiarity is unconvincing. That the court would consider these justifications, on the other hand, to violate the standards of manifest error seems unlikely. And it must be noted the lack of political opposition does indicate a low salience and general acceptance of the directive. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. After these two contributions, we once again have the possibility to ask questions to both of our distinguished speakers. Mr. Becker.
Diesmal nur ganz kurz. Ich finde.
Just briefly this time. I think that we have just heard two more expert views, which would probably confirm that there is a scientific evidence to show that we need to review the status quo. Whatever this means in practice, I wouldn't like to commit myself. I'm trying to put my own personal views in the background rather, but I do think that people have emphasized very strongly here the chronotype issue, and that that's relevant. But I don't think there's any hugely relevant change to the life of people. Thank you. Mr. Lisa, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the speakers. I have one question for Professor Martamero. And then there's some interesting implications of what she said. It's not just a question of changing the time twice in the year that's significant, because I suppose the impact of that lasts for about a week. It's the fact that we have summertime at all, because we get up an hour earlier, and because many people's biological clock doesn't deal with that terribly well, and this allegedly leads to disease. Well, if I've correctly understood that, then it means not only that we shouldn't have daylight saving, we should stick with winter time all year, and I don't know that everybody wants that. So that's a second strand to the whole discussion. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I'd just like to add a question. What you've just told us, Professor, is this something for which there's a lot of evidence, or is there also contrary research which would contradict this? I mean, I know you would never get something that was absolutely uncontroversial, but is there a wide evidence base, a broad evidence base for this, and is it relatively uncontroversial, the position you've just espoused? Then secondly, these are very serious assertions. I wonder why politics and society in general have devoted so little attention to this. It seems to me that this is the first time that I've actually had to engage with this issue, because I have heard it raised by individuals now, but I'd never really engaged with it before. I certainly didn't think that there would be any damage to individuals' health as a result. So can you please explain the source of that, the origin? What is it that causes the damage to the health of the individual? Can you quantify it? And can you say how many people are affected? Or are a lot of people affected? Or more than that? More than I could imagine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I ask the distinguished speakers to answer? Sorry, we will take one more question from Mr. Le Breton.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. I think this has been a very interesting afternoon. I'd like to thank those who've taken the time to come here and tell us about summertime and what their point of view is. I think that it's left our heads spinning a bit. We're beginning to wonder, why do we have summertime, I think, some of us, because the arguments all seem to be going in one direction. All the arguments that were adduced when we introduced it have been countered by people speaking today. Allegedly, there isn't greater safety because there are more accidents, car accidents now. The question of biorhythms. According to people speaking today, biorhythms are greatly disturbed. The effective work of the individual is compromised, as is their immunity and their health. It's alleged that there are actually no economic savings generated, and apparently, indeed, transition to day saving time costs a considerable amount of money. 131 billion euros per year, or something of that order of magnitude. I'm not sure if I have recalled the figures correctly, but if I have, that's really a lot of money. Mr. van den Brune says that the legal foundation adduced for introducing daylight saving is being called into question now. I wonder why he says that. I wonder why he thinks we actually started this in the first place. Do you think it was just a bit of empire building on the part of the European Union? There wasn't really much advantage to be gained in the first place at the outset. Thank you.
Distinguished speakers, I would like to make sure that Mr. Le Breton knows that there will be one more contribution afterwards, that this is not the end of the hearing. There is one more contribution afterwards. May I ask maybe Professor Merov to begin?
Yes, thank you for the questions. I've jotted down a few points to clarify based on the questions that were asked. One distinguished guest has referred to the fact that the difficulties in sleeping, for instance, last for maybe about a week. Well, in fact, actually, we have studied this, and this has been investigated in about 50 people. And it turns out that with early chronotypes, actually they have very little difficulty with the springtime transition, and they can readjust relatively quickly, probably within that week, to the new time. But actually later chronotypes, and most people in the population are later chronotypes, it actually persists for several weeks afterwards. And so if you look up to 4 weeks afterwards, you're just seeing people sort of coming into sleeping when they were sleeping at the beginning of the daylight saving time. So it's a bit more persistent than we have the impression that it is. And you wondered if I was suggesting that we stay with wintertime, and yes, that's what I was suggesting based on evidence from chronobiology research. So that's my distillation of the entire body of the research. I want to, the colleague over here has wondered why we haven't heard more about this earlier, for instance. And I would just note that chronobiology is really taking off as a field of research. I think that the entire field of life sciences really had no clue how important the biological clock is. So just to make clear, the biological clock is timing all of these processes in our body to a very specific time of day. And evolution has dictated somehow that these are the best times of day for these things to happen. And when we mess with this, when we change those times artificially, we can go on, we can function, we feel okay, we might feel a little tired, we might not answer questions quite as quickly, small things, small changes. But these are small changes that apparently, based on research, for instance, the epidemiological research of social jet lag, showing social jet lag, these are small changes that add up. I think of the biological clock and social jet lag like a disease it's a disease of small effects. It's a little bit hard to explain, but there are diseases of big effects. So if you have a certain gene, a certain mutation in the Huntington gene, you will get Huntington's disease. That's a disease of big effect. But then there are diseases of very small effects where you add up very, very small insults over a long time, and then you get a disease. And that's what that's the type of disease that social jet lag is. And it's manifest in a number of ways, in cardiac disease, metabolic disease, immune diseases, increased risks of cancer, things like this, because the circadian clock is controlling all of those systems. So that's a little bit more background. I have prepared a white paper, which we, the chronobiology colleagues in Europe, have prepared a white paper for you, and that will be linked to the internet site of this hearing, and it will be, as I understand, it's available in the back of the room, and I urge you all to take it. It's one page which is really boiled down the essence of how we view this as chronobiologists. How many are affected? So social jet lag is something that everyone who uses an alarm clock has some social jet lag. So that means about 80% of the population has social jet lag. Some have very little, and some have very, very much. Teenagers have the most. And the last point is, how did we ever get summertime or daylight saving time? How was this introduced, and what's the history? And I can't speak authoritatively on this, but I have read some quite remarkable histories of public time. And one story that I've heard is that there was a British architect who was commuting to London every day, and he was obviously an early chronotype, and he noticed that the shutters on the windows were closed to allow people to sleep. And he felt offended, and this was a great waste of sunlight. And he apparently started, this is what I've read, the initiative for summertime, and it's all, the rest is history. I don't know if that's correct, but this is one crazy story I've heard. So it's not scientific how this came about. Anything?
Thank you. I would just like to point out that the essence of my opinion on the choice of legal basis concerns the difference between two questions: whether or not we should have daylight saving time, and what the internal market dimension is of having divergent timetables of going into daylight saving time. And it's on that latter issue that, from two angles: one, the better regulation program with the impact assessment guideline, and two, the more recent case law of the Court of Justice, that I stated that the directive does not seem convincing in its justification. A lot of recitals and a lot of evidence offered concerns the issue of daylight saving time, which has not really anything to do with Article 95, formerly 95, now 114, on the harmonization and its effect on the internal market. I do grant that there is some evidence on it, but it does not seem to amount to the standard of appreciable distortion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's all for the questions. Okay, well, thereby we have exhausted the questions concerning the second block, and last but not least, Dr. Michael Wunderlich, member of the Management Board, Director of the German Association of Energy and Water Industries from Berlin, are going to address us. Sir, you have 10 minutes.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, members. I would like to start by thanking you for having invited me to this hearing at the European Parliament. My name is Michael Wunderlich. I'm a member of the Executive Board of the German Association of Water and Energy. Well, I wanted to try and shed a little bit of light on the energy aspects of all of this. I could state right from the outset that the available scientific data are not entirely satisfactory or updated. If you look at technical innovation in energy generation, the change in the framework conditions have made some major changes, and they have to be taken into account and empirically analysed. I'll come back to those later. Now, the change to summertime has existed since 1980 and 1996, and the whole idea started from the oil crisis in 1973, and the idea was we should be saving daylight time. Now, the idea is that well, from the 1996, there's a standard start and end date for summertime, according to the directive, and this was on the basis of an expert study from member states. Well, one of the major arguments is that through the harmonized start of summertime, then the single market can be helped, and the most strongly affected sectors, that's to say agriculture and transport, could be working on a level playing field. But at the time, the Commission said that summertime did encourage leisure activities in the evening, but there's been no other assessment of the use of summertime in achieving environmental objectives. Well, summertime can produce energy savings because less electricity is required. Nevertheless, there are increase in the need for extra heating. And, of course, there might be extra traffic in the evening if there's more light. So it's very difficult to assess any possible savings, but I think that they would probably be small in scale. No, apart from encouraging leisure activities in the evening, the Commission really didn't take any of the other aspects into consideration at the time. In terms of energy use, the whole idea is questionable. Originally, energy was supposed to be part of the objectives, but there's no noticeable effect. It's only electrical lighting in the evening where this makes a difference, but the extra heating required in the morning is the problem, and that's more than compensates. The Technical University of Munich in 1983 carried out a study which says micro and macro analysis of the energy needs. It said that the influence would be so small that it to be negligible. In 1994, our predecessor as an organization was unable to identify any energy-saving effect. In 2007, the Commission produced a communication where they summarized the current situation. If you look at that, well, I'll take a few examples from that document. In Bulgaria, 0.01% would be the effect of the total consumption. In France, it would be 0.05% compared to total energy use in 2005. Although I think that there are new technical possibilities for carrying out that analysis better. Estonia didn't have summertime in between 2000 and 2001, and in fact, energy use was higher as a result. So basically, there's no major difference to be identified. If you look at outside the European Union, there's a study from the United States that have noticed negative energy-saving effects. In Indiana, the federal state of measured the energy use of more than 300,000 households. After the introduction of summertime, energy use or electricity use increased, and that's probably because of the extra use of heating in mornings. There's also a study from the Johannes Kepler University in Linz from 2013, so it's quite recent. They summarize by recommending that the difference would be 4 million euros for Austria. Well, the I don't really understand the scientific basis that they use to. So if you look at the energy and economic effects with the current data we have at our disposal, putting the clocks back and forward has no advantages whatsoever. The savings in energy for lighting, particularly thanks to efficient lighting systems that have been introduced in recent years, we see it entirely compensated by extra use of heating at other times. Now, our organisation reported on these figures in 2010. We stated that that 8% of the energy use of households is covered by lighting, and that figure is falling. With more modern electrical appliances and lighting and heating, I think that that at the end of the day, 40% is going to be the proportion of heating in the household energy mix, and I think that for climate change, that's a sleeping giant. I think that we need more comprehensive scientific studies, not only on energy efficiency, but also the influence of summertime on changes to energy production in the member states. Now that renewable energy is being used more widely, we should consider not only the changes to energy consumption, but also we have to consider how the feed-in effect from renewable energy works at regional level. If you look at the solar energy proportion of the overall energy mix, I think it might be better to consider the overall system effect. I think that we need a lot of research on this subject. In conclusion, I would recommend that if there is going to be a review of summertime legislation, then it should only take place on the basis of proper scientific research. On the basis of existing research, you would suggest that there would be no advantages so I would like to thank everyone for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now it is time for questions to be addressed to our last speaker, Mr. Royal.
Also ich bedanke mich sehr für diese Auskünfte. Die sind ja nicht.
Thank you very much for that information. It's not a tool to be neglected. Now, you've got the very origin of this process. In the times of energy crisis, we have to save energy. Okay, I can understand that idea, but as you confirmed to us today, it appears that these energy savings have not materialized. And I'm glad that you mentioned the technical opportunities and possibilities we have open to us. I think there's no reason to spend time on putting the clocks back and forward. Now, the 2007 survey from the Commission, you did mention that. The decision to adopt the directive meant that there was also a review obligation, and at the time they didn't want to carry out the survey, but they were forced to do so, and it states there, I mean, you mentioned a couple of examples, but I think it was across the board, there was no savings in any single country. There was only one argument. Nobody, least of all the European Commission, had any desire to change the situation. So my question to you is this. You've used German figures because that's your area of competence. In the Commission's figures from 2007, if I've understood correctly, it says that the figures from Germany are not untypical. The situation in the other member states is similar, whereas the United States was in a very different position. But it's no longer an argument that you can use. Nobody needs to prove now that putting the clocks backwards and forwards is pointless. It's proven.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Auch ich...
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, I'd also like to thank the speaker for his presentation. Well, I can only agree with what Mr. Royal has just said. The advantages or the justifications for introducing the directive in 2001 was a consequence of the desire to make savings in energy terms. And it seems that there is no energy saving to be gained. So that takes away the whole point of this directive. We've also heard about the negative consequences from other speakers. The biorhythm, the body, etc. So we've heard a lot about all of that now, and I don't have any further questions, but what I'm still concerned about is what this costs us in Europe, putting the clocks backwards and forwards. What does that cost? So for me, that would be an important thing to know, and particularly in times like these, we're trying to make every possible effort to make savings. So my request to the chair is that we could talk after this hearing about how we can continue. We could ask the coordinators as well. We could also commission our impact assessment unit. We could give them the job of whether we could carry out some kind of initiative report, what possibilities would be open to us. I think that today's debate has really brought out the situation that nobody has spoken out in favour of putting the clocks backwards and forwards. Everybody says we need to act, so let's do everything possible to take the initiative and make sure that this item doesn't simply fall off the political agenda.
Does Mr. Wunderlich wish to react?
Very briefly, thank you very much, Chairman. Ich mache es auf Deutsch. Ich habe die beiden Fragen auf Deutsch bekommen.
The questions were in German, so I'll field them in German. Looking at the Commission's report, I think quite clearly the single market is all about harmonization. Given the technological advancement, there should be continuing systematic research on energy saving, because I think the potential advantages of solar energy are worth looking at. I have figures for Germany. I have figures from the Commission report, which is on the thin side. The Commission report refers to 57% overall, and they're satisfied with that. And I don't know how easy it's going to be to change the directive. But from an energy point of view, there is no proof that there is energy saving. I can confirm that much.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, before closing this hearing and thanking all our distinguished speakers, we have one distinguished guest, and that is the member of Czech Senate, Mr. Šilar, the author of For Only One Time, and Mr. Šilar would like to address us. So you have the floor. Pane Šilare, promluvte.
You have the floor, Mr. Šilar.
Vážené dámy.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for giving me the floor and for the opportunity to be present for your debate. I'd like to thank my friend Pavel Svoboda and Mrs. Šojdrová, who have been of great assistance to me here in the European Parliament.
Dlouhou dobu se zabývám touto problematikou.
I have been dealing with this issue for some considerable time, and I just have a number of comments. The issue arose last century when Benjamin Franklin introduced summer time in the United States. The Germans and the French did the same in the First World War, so as to be able to fight longer, and Hitler did the same in the Second World War for the same reason. Summertime was introduced in Czechoslovakia, communist Czechoslovakia, in the 1970s to save energy. But this is quite simply human interference with nature. People consider themselves more powerful than nature, more powerful than the sun, and that leads people to take these kinds of decisions. I'd like to thank the professor who spoke on the health issues, because Professor Ilnerova in the Czech Republic has similar findings to those of Professor Mero, and I often refer to those findings. And given that nobody is benefiting, and according to our findings, 20% of the population are disturbed by time changes, then I think the sooner we get rid of them, the sooner the European Commission gets rid of them, the better. People with Down syndrome suffer from time changes, and their suffering is more protracted in time. We have friends, colleagues with Down syndrome. They are suffering, and if we care about them and their suffering, then it's high time for us to do something about this. And the European Commission really needs to take some action. We'll continue campaigning in the Czech Republic, and we'll try to persuade the government to do away with the switch from winter to summertime. Thank you very much for your support.
Thank you very much. Professor, you have the floor.
I just would like to point out that Benjamin Franklin was a famous early chronotype. He never would have invented daylight saving time if it had been normal or late. I apologize for my countrymen.
Okay, I think that it is time to thank all our distinguished speakers for being with us today, to taking the time to inform us. I would like to thank all the members not only for attending but for supporting me in organizing this hearing, because at the very beginning, when I came up with the idea of organizing this joint hearing, not everybody was, let's say, optimistic about the idea, to put it in very diplomatic terms. I think that we have learned much from our speakers, and we know that we need to move forward with this piece of legislation. How to move forward, we discussed this shortly this morning at the coordinators meeting of the Legal Affairs Committee, and we came at this moment to the conclusion that giving a oral question to the Commission at the next plenary session could be one of the ways to, let's say, accelerate the whole thing. But obviously, Mrs. Niebler is right that own initiative report is also an option for the future. I thank you very much for attending this hearing, and I close it.